Hello everyone, so we are Group F and we are going to talk about Chapter 6, that is privilege, but in a social justice perspective, where Laura Cardona, Nicole Santos, and Gustavo Barros. So what is privilege? Privilege is known as opportunities, but from a social justice point of view, is a systematically given dominance and the institutional processes by which the beliefs and values of the dominant groups are made normal and universal. So they seem like what we have to do. And the dominant groups enjoy rights, advantages, and protections by expenses of the minorized group. So there are dynamics inside the privilege system. There are two types, external and internal. So I'm going to talk about the external one. So there's a metaphor in which they compare the cultural socialization to a fish immersed of water. So if the fish is swimming against current, it's gonna be a hard swim. But if the current is favorable, it's gonna be so easy. It's the same for a person. The outcomes that we receive is not just on our effort that we put. It depends too in our environment and our circumstances. So, but it doesn't mean that privilege is natural. The privilege is an ongoing dynamic that is continually reproduced, negotiated, and established. So that doesn't mean that you somehow you're born with it, but it's not natural. It's just because you are part of the dominant group. So there's an example, like we all know that white, tall, upper class Catholic are dominant group, are part usually of dominant group because those are the wealthy people. But for the last elections for the U.S. president, Biden was the best looking guy. So there are theories that say that probably that's the reason he won. That's like besides all the four that I past mentioned, he was good looking, so give him some advantage. So for the external and structural, there's three types. So we have integration of group based into the structure of society. So we have privilege and advantage, but we didn't get we didn't fight for them. We just have them. These privilege have always been there, so they are seen as normal. And we have this big example of ableism. So the people with disabilities, they are seen as abnormal, and all the opportunities for them are way different than for non-disabled people. So we have who construct what's normal and what's abnormal. So that's created by the dominant group, as we say at the beginning, and they exert a kind of oppression. So the normal is the set of ideas that determines what's acceptable in a given time and place. And we have four things that helps to categorize people. So first, the definitions that are characteristics, language, social classification, structures such as the cities are built, and system of society such as educational segregation. Abnormal people seem to slow down the process, so they are split from normal people in school. That way, they don't slow down the learning of the regular people. So then we have invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. So we don't need to think about it. It's already there. Um, there's a social segregation, as I mentioned before. They separate like the people that they consider they have different characteristics in another group. The ones in the dominant group are benefited by the oppression, And the big question is like, to see if you're in a dominant group is to ask what you perceive as normal because you're born with it. So now Nicole is gonna keep going with the internal dynamic.
Hello, my name is Nicole, and to keep going with our presentation, I'm going to talk about the internal and attitudinal effects of privilege. Um, the ones that Laura was explaining before are external, they are structural. So it's something that affects the person from the outside, from society. And these aspects now explain something that is internal, that comes from the attitudes and behaviors of the group, of the person itself. So um, there are some beliefs that try to rationalize the concentration of power in the dominant group's hand, to justify their right to rule in sort of way. And this is based on some ideologies. The key ones are meritocracy, or the belief that people's achievements are based solely on their efforts or their abilities or merits, and not any other aspects. And there's also the belief of equal opportunity, which means that in today's world, where people are no longer prejudiced, there's no more prejudice, and social injustice is a thing of the past, and everyone has the same opportunities now. It's also based on individualism, which is the belief that everybody is unique and is not affected by the forces of socialization. They're outside of that, and being under a group or another is irrelevant. Um, and also the ideology of human nature, that this thinking rationalizes that privilege is natural, that it's going to happen either way because it's human nature. So someone is going to be on top no matter what. Um, Another effect of privilege is the internalization of messages of your group superiority, which means that there is no value in the experiences of people with disabilities, for example, as Laura was saying. It's an example that is used throughout the whole article, the whole chapter. So the dominant group believes that there is nothing to gain or to learn from the experiences of the minoritized group. In this case, able-bodied people feel that they are capable of understanding the experiences and representing and speaking on behalf of people with disabilities. So they tell only stories that affirm their superiority. They lack interest in the minoritized group, and they only produce stories that are inspirational and from their perspective, not from the minoritized group. There's also the lack of humility that results from the limited knowledge that they have of the minoritized group, which sometimes can be arrogant, can be sounding as arrogance, um, because they feel responsible, they feel capable of representing other people without consulting them. And there's also the matter of invisibility that Laura was speaking before as well, that the dominant group doesn't feel that they have the privilege, they don't need to acknowledge it to have it. And the the scholars usually call this sanctioned not knowing or willful ignorance. And this means that the dominant group chooses to remain ignorant even when there is overwhelming evidence of injustice in society. And sometimes they even aggressively resist acknowledging this information, even when they don't know it, but they act this way, they behave this way to remain dominant, to remain in the dominant group. So these beliefs end up producing some attitudes in the dominant group's behavior. So we listed some of them here. the invasion of personal space, or the privileged group feels comfortable invading the space of minoritized persons. We see this a lot with people with disabilities or Black people. They have to endure a lot of people invading their private space or their personal space. There's also the issue of misqualified representation that I talked about before, that the dominant group feels qualified to represent the experiences of the minoritized persons. And there's also the issue of superiority, that the privileged group feels that they are superior and that the minoritized person should be fixed or assimilate to be more like the normal group. And there's also the segregation that Laura spoke before too, that the privileged group prefers to live separated, segregated from the minoritized group.
Unfortunately, common misconceptions about privilege are so widespread that they often close door of opportunity we have to understand and account for our part in system of social injustice. So we need to see beyond our privilege because we somehow are part of them. We are part of a dominant group. As we said in this example, we are not this, the majority of us. We are not this non-disabled people. All the structures in the city are made for us. So we must to keep out the arrogance that Nicole mentioned and be more thoughtful about people around us with different with disabilities. Um, Privilege isn't deliberately demanding something. It's about circumstances. As we said, like we born and then we were part of a dominant group. Because the fact that you born with non-disabled or without disabilities that make you part of that group. So you are enjoying some benefits that you didn't ask for, and that doesn't make you like a bad person. But we must be thoughtful about dis- people with disabled to help them out and just question if there's fair for if something is fair for everyone, not just us.
It's entirely possible that you've been diminished at the expense of the same identity that grants you certain privileges, which is another reason why privilege doesn't mean you have an easy life. So that's another misconception of privilege, is that um, if you are a part of one specific dominant group, you have an easy life and you've never had troubles. And for example, if you are an able-bodied white person, you have have never had a problem in your life, and that's not true. People have all kinds of trouble in their life, and this doesn't mean that they are not enjoying the benefits of certain kinds of privileges. So a few points about the common misconceptions of privilege is pointing out privileges doesn't mean hating people who have it. It doesn't mean that the privileged group feels hate specifically towards the minoritized group. Um, and having privilege doesn't mean that you're not a unique individual, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. So um, common misconceptions are that if you haven't been personally discriminated, you're not benefiting, and that's not always true. Also, that if you can feel the social or institutional power, you don't have it. That's also not true. You don't need to feel it. So there's another belief that if a minoritized person is in charge, for example, there is no oppression, and that a good example of that was when President Barack Obama was president of the United States, and because he was a black person, that didn't mean that there was no more racism in America. It's just a common misconception. And another one is that if you are oppressed in one social group, you can't be privileged in another. So that is also not true, because you can be part of one dominant group in one aspect and be prejudiced in another. So you can be a white person, but you can have a disability. So you will benefit from one dominant group, but you were not going to be in another privileged group. So I think that that was it for our group.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for your
you.
attention.